Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the program today. Today, my guest on This Week in America is Peter Pactor, award-winning author. Daniel, Being Number 3, is the 8th book in his Daniel series. Peter was a teacher for 50 years, didn't want to retire, but at 73 didn't think he could be so effective. He still had things he wanted to teach and decided to do it through books. He had to decide whether he should write expository books or whether he should write short stories. Well, he chose the latter. Now his books have won 8 awards. Peter has adopted 4 youngsters. The youngest was 10. The oldest 2 were 13. He claims to have learned much from all of them. Now, Peter joined Toastmasters, and within a couple of years, he had mastered the art and value of stories. He was storytelling professionally. He's an avid reader, and he particularly enjoys biographies of autodidacts. Peter Pactor, author of Daniel Being Number 3, the 8th book in the highly acclaimed Daniel series, is our guest on This Week in America. Peter, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us.
Well, it's fun to be here, Rick. I'm looking forward to it.
I am as well, in talking about the Daniel series. And let's talk about when you decided to start writing the Daniel series. How did this all begin for you?
Here's my 50th year teaching, and I just felt I couldn't go on any further and do a good job. So I still wanted to teach things, and this is what came out. Choosing the format was fine. I chose to write a novel rather than in stories, rather than do an expository book. I've already written one for teenagers, and so I started. And of course, the first one's kind of strange. I didn't know how to start it. It wasn't with a good opening, like it was the best of times or worst of times. I had to struggle with that and work through it, and I did pretty well. About chapter 3 or chapter 4, the writing starts getting really good, and it's continued being good since that point.
That's amazing. Finish the thought.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, an award-winning series, so you obviously caught on early in the series. There are 8 books available, the latest being Daniel Being Number 3. Peter Pactor, that's Pactor. His website is peterpactor.net. You get all the information there. So let's go back to the book. I interrupted you, and I apologize for that. You got into your groove early on. Let's talk about some of the challenges in writing. And I think of that before your presentations were in front of real people. You had the students for 50 years, and as you're teaching, you could see whether it was getting through, what kind of progress you were making. As giving speeches in Toastmasters, you have that immediate response. Was that a challenge, switching over to writing, because you're writing and it's an audience of you at that point? How challenging was that?
I don't think it was very challenging at all, quite frankly. Just getting started was a real challenge, but I don't have a writer's block. Sometimes I get stuck in a moment, and if it's longer than 2 days, I go back and reread, because it means I've written something that was wrong. I needed to correct something way further back, and it was pretty easy getting the writing. Although when I first started, I said, how am I going to write a book that's at least 60,000 words? Well, this book, the first book, was 93,000 words. And I stopped because I have a theory about the size of books in our modern times. So that's what I did. But sometimes, it just takes me time to do it. But I started working, and this was a good plan for me anyway. I worked in half-an-hour increments, so that I would start to have my timer on, and then when it went off, I'd stop, because if it was going well, it would continue well the next day. If it wasn't going well, it was time to quit. And sometimes I did 2 or 3 blocks in a day, and a good the quantity of writing for me was a very good quantity of writing was maybe 500 words in that half hour.
Yes.
And sometimes I would write a sentence in that half hour. Sometimes I wouldn't write anything, but it never bothered me in that regard because I want to be good. And in fact, I thought about rewriting parts of book one, but I'm not going to do it because when I was in college, I read all of Schiller's plays in German, and his first play wasn't very good. It sold well at the theaters, but it showed that how his writing improved from the beginning of the book, The Robbers, to his major
Yes.
one, William Tell. And I thought that was a good thing. If I ever become famous and people really like my books, it'll be there to see. They can see all the mistakes and whatever. But I think when I redo the book, I'm going to correct all the spelling errors.
I love the way you go about this in the half-hour increments and not forcing something. So often people, they're not going to leave their chair until they've come up with something for that day. And I love the approach that you take. Our guest is Peter Pactor. That's Pactor. That's important because his website is peterpactor.net. You can link on by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. We'll take you directly to Peter's page on his website, and you'll be able to get information on all of the books. There are 8 now in all. Daniel being number 3 is the 8th in the award-winning series. Why did you choose Daniel as the name for your protagonist? How did you come up with that?
Well, that's a good idea. I get asked that a lot, and about other names in the book. I don't know. It was just the name, and my protagonist should be Daniel. When we open, he's 12 years old, and that's all I can tell you. My brother was reading, and I have a character named Adam Wainwright. He said, "Do you know that Adam Wainwright is a pitcher for the Cardinals?" I said, "No, I don't follow sports anymore. I'm not an addict like I used to be." And it just happens. The names just seem appropriate. And I don't know where they come from.
It's interesting how you develop that. And we'll talk about the characters that you've developed as we go through our conversation today. I want to go back and talk about some of the challenges as you were putting the series together. There are 8 books now. When you started with book number 1, did you have any idea this would turn into at least an 8-book series?
Well, that's pretty good. I thought it was going to be a 1-book story on the Depression and the crash. But interestingly enough, when I had the story in my mind and I started writing it, and it amazed me what was happening in this, and I didn't realize that once I started writing and developing the characters, I couldn't make the characters do what I wanted them to do because it wasn't in their nature. And so some things I was going to write, I didn't. I had the whole thing outlined in my mind, and it didn't come out. I thought it was going to be 1 book about the crash in 29, and it ended up being 4 books, believe it or not, because it's more than telling a linear story. Like, I love Westerns, and I read Louis L'Amour and Max Brand regularly, and you start at the beginning and you go to the end. It's a straight story and no detours, but every time I added a character, because Daniel's a boy and he's going to school and he has his own problems, and he gets problems within the school because he's never been to school before. His dad sent him there in 7th grade, and he was totally self-educated in their library tower on his dad's estate. His dad is one of the wealthiest people in the world, and he made all his money in the stock market. So it's really an incredible story, and the stock market crash is an incredible story.
Oh yes,
I put in real characters in every book because I think that these people the real characters should be remembered for who they were. And we have a Will Rogers Auditorium in Fort Worth where I live, and people who are at least 20 years younger, most people don't know who Will Rogers was. And he deserves to be recognized, in my opinion. And so they're famous in their time and they disappear. So in my first book, I can tell you who I introduced. I introduced Jesse Livermore, Bernard Baruch, and Herbert Hoover, who was the president-elect at the time the book opens. And I don't know if anyone knows who Jesse Livermore was or Bernard Baruch, but they were really major people in their time. Jesse Livermore ran away from home because his dad wanted him to quit school and he wanted to go to school. His dad was a farmer in Massachusetts. It seems to me that the major crop in Massachusetts is rocks. They always come up through the fields, and you have to move them. That was his job, and he was really good in math. He ran away. His mother gave him $5 in a suit that was too big for him, and he ended up in Boston, outside of Payne Weber. And he saw people going in and out, and he walked in to see what was so interesting. And the floor manager came over, "Can I help you?" He said, "I'd like a job." So he got a job writing the quotes on the stock board. We didn't have the electronics that we have today.
Yes.
And he learned that he could read the market. And this is an interesting story in itself. He went out, he went with a friend to a bucket house. The bucket house was a casino for betting on stock movement. And he was very good. Eventually, he was so good that he got banned from the bucket houses on the East Coast, like the casinos banned some people.
Yes.
And he made millions. In the crash of 1907, he made $3 million. In the crash of 1929, he made over $100 million. That's their price. Today, it'd be millions. He cornered the market twice, went bankrupt once, paid it off, and then he paid off all his debts to the people he owed from the bankruptcy. He didn't have to do it, but he did it. And I find him really interesting. And I read a biography of him. The first time I read it 4 times the first year. It was so interesting to me. And then I like Bernard Baruch. He was alive when I was a young man. He was born in 1870, I believe, and he also made money in the stock market. But what was really interesting to him, he had a seat on the stock exchange, and he gave $1 million to his father when he became wealthy. And his father said, "What are you going to do with all that money?" And I don't think he ever worked again. He was Wilson's head of the industrial complex and all the industries during World War I. I can't think of the title. And he went to Versailles with Wilson to help him promote his ideas, which didn't get across very well in Europe, and none of the 14 points went into it.
Oh, yes.
And Will Rogers said, "America's won all its wars, but lost every conference." But he came back and tried to help Wilson promote the treaty, which really wasn't a very good treaty. And it just didn't work, as everyone knows. He also would, if he was in Washington, he'd sit on the park bench outside the White House, and the president would come out and wave him in, because he became the advisor to presidents. And he was still doing that in 1964 when he was 94. Just an amazing man. And these people should really be remembered for their contributions to our country. And they made a statue. I don't remember who did it. I don't even remember where it's at, but there's a statue of Bernard Baruch sitting on a park bench. And
interesting.
Kind of interesting. And then Herbert Hoover was very interesting. He I don't want to talk about Herbert Hoover. He was a pretty square guy, but he wasn't very good at communicating, even though he had been the Secretary of Commerce for Harding and Coolidge. And he had never held a political office, but he did feed all the people in Europe after World War I, which was then called the Great War.
Well, it's a slice of history that you have in the books, and I know it's meticulously researched. It's the Daniel series. The latest is Daniel being number 3, the 8th in the series. The award-winning author, Peter Pactor, Pactor, is our guest on the program. His website is named peterpactor.net. You can link on by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. I was going to ask you, and I wanted to find out what you've learned in writing this series, but obviously you've learned a lot just from the research of an appreciation for history, an appreciation for some of the figures in history, some of those main characters, some of those not quite so major characters. What's this been like for you doing the research and writing these books? What have you learned?
Well, most of the material in the book, it was already in my mind. But because I've been an avid reader, I tried to read 100 books a year, and I used to keep track of it, and then my computer died, and I stopped doing that. It was some years ago, but I saw that Louis L'Amour read his autobiography, and he did that. He kept a list of books he read for several years, and I thought it was a good idea, and I started doing it, and I put a library in my classroom at school for books that I thought the kids might be interested in reading.
Yes,
and it was really interesting. Lincoln's my number one favorite person in history. He really is, and I've got more books on Lincoln than anyone else. And actually, this surprises me that I have second most is Harry Truman, who was also a very great man.
Yes.
Oh, when I was a boy, I lived through this time. I'm old. I'm older than most countries. Anyway, when I was a kid, on Lucky Strike, at the bottom of the Lucky Strike pack said LSMFT, which meant Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. But as a kid, we used to say LSMFT meant Lord Save Me from Truman, because he annoyed a lot of people because he did what was right. And there's a great book. I'm reading it. I think it's the third time I've read this book on Harry Truman. It's called Plain Speaking, and it's by Merle Miller, and it's just fascinating. And so he had a lot of wisdom, Harry Truman did, and he could be gruff. He was one time doing his railroad trip campaigning in 1948, and someone yelled out from the crowd, said, "Give him hell, Harry." He said, "I don't give him hell. I tell the truth on them, and they think they're in hell." and he had, in my opinion, he had a very good sense of humor.
Yes, he did.
And he did what he was right. I mean, he fired MacArthur, which caused a lot of consternation in this country, because MacArthur was a hero, but he wasn't in my opinion, a very nice man. And I thought Herbert Hoover should have fired him when he broke up the bonus march who were camped in Washington, D.C. And Hoover told him to take it easy on them, and he didn't. And I think he should have fired him at that point. But that's my opinion, and there's a lot of people who will disagree with me on both things I said.
Well, the nice thing is that you can read about it and form those opinions, and you you bring people to life in the era, the time period that we're talking about. That's one of the benefits of reading the Daniel series now. 8 books. You'll find them, of course, at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the usual places. And you can get them at Peter's website as well, Peter Pactor, Pactor.net.
I don't sell them on my website.
Oh, okay. Okay. They can.
It's just information.
And then you can take that website and go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and order the books there.
Yes.
Yep.
And so that's what I've been doing. And I've been promoting my books before I got this promotion, EC Publishing, to promote my works, because I want people to read them. And I've been giving them away, quite frankly, to strangers. I talk readily to people. My opening line is, "Are you having fun yet?" So, Rick, are you having fun yet?
I'm having a lot of fun. I'm enjoying our conversation today. The only problem, the time is going by way too quickly. We could have 3 hours set aside to talk about the series that you have, the award-winning series. You mentioned you want people to read the book. What results would you like to see? What should the takeaway be as people read any of the books or all of the books in the Daniel series?
Right. I have a woman I gave one to. She works in one of the grocery stores here. I've given a lot of books to the people that work in the grocery store. And she came out to me and she said, "This is my life." She's reading The Age of Discovery. And she said, "When I finish, can we have tea or coffee and talk about it?" And I said, "Sure." And I told her to get her husband to read it, and we'll do a threesome. And I have people, this really surprised me. The first book came out, and one of my friends bought it. He came up to me. He said, "I had to read it twice. There's so much information in there. There's a lot to learn from my book." And when I reread it, I said, "Oh my gosh, I forgot all about this. This is really important for me." And I've read them all over 20 times, and I don't get tired of them. So it's the most times I've read a book, I think. So maybe it's the Iliad. But it's good. And I have friends who've read them more, maybe a half a dozen times, the whole series.
It's amazing.
And every time you read it, or I read it, or my friends tell me, they find something new that they didn't remember. And, I have life lessons in there. I think the first lesson I teach is what I taught in school the last half of my teaching career. I got annoyed with a student, and finally she always made excuses. She was smart and she was fun, but I said I was just tired of hearing her whine about her excuses. And I said, "Repeat after me. I am responsible for my life." And you know what? We talked about that for the whole period, every year after that, at the beginning of school, and the kids got it. And before the kid came to my class and tried to give me an excuse, someone, before I could even open my mouth, would say, "Repeat after me. I am responsible for my life." And teachers told me my students did it in their classes. And the athletic director, I was there for my son because meeting for parents because he was playing football. And he said, "Peter Pactor started this. I am responsible for my life," and it's carried over onto the football field. It was unbelievable, the changes that took place just because of that.
That's something that we all can remember, and just one of the examples why Peter was an excellent teacher and the kids responded so well during 50 years in the classroom. Now people, much broader audience worldwide, able to learn from the Daniel series, the latest being Daniel being number 3. This is the 8th book in the series, a great lesson there as well. Number 1 is God, number 2 is everyone else, and number 3 is you. And a lot of great life lessons coming out of this book as well. Peter, I've got a couple minutes left here. What are you working on now? Will there be more in the Daniel series?
Well, the 9th book is at the publisher.
Fantastic.
And I've started the 10th book, and I have a fantasy book I put out, The Ring of Truth, which is exceedingly funny. And I'm working on the second one of those. And I have several books. I have a book I put out when I was doing storytelling professionally, and I decided to expand it because I have a lot more stories, and I still tell stories. I'm still in Toastmasters, and I'm a life member of Payoff Storytelling Association. But it's really been a good experience. I like writing, and I learn as much writing as I do, I'm sure, people who read the books.
Well, that's a compliment to if you're enjoying it yourself, doing the research, telling the stories, we will be enjoying it as we're reading and learning from the stories. It is so well done. The Daniel series, award-winning. Good news, several more in the process. I see it as several more interview opportunities to talk to Peter about the remarkable career that he's led in education as a successful author, as a successful storyteller. Look forward to having Peter back on the program. He mentioned EC Publishing LLC, bringing your vision to life with expert editing, design, and marketing tools tailored to your publishing success. They arranged our conversation with Peter today. Peter, a pleasure having you on the program. Books available wherever books are sold. I'll give you that information here in a second. Thank you for being with us on the program. Hopefully we can do this again. Real pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. And as I told you earlier, I said I really enjoyed talking with you. So it goes again. So
well, thank you. And it's enjoyable to have you here and to learn about the books. The books being in the Daniel series, Daniel being number 3 is the 8th and the latest in the award-winning series. Peter's website is very simple. His name, Peter Pactor. That's PACTOR.net. Book available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. All of that information on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And we are back on today's program right after these messages.
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, Associate Producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, Segment Producer. Ben Watson, Webmaster. Otto Bechet, Director of Engineering and TV Production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, Executive Producer of This Week in America.